My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble Lady Baroness Gardiner of Parkes, my fellow Australian-born female peer in your Lordship's house, and that will become somewhat relevant later. And I'd also like to welcome the noble Lord Sentamu to your Lordship's house, or back to your Lordship's house. The last time we met, I believe we were talking about Yorkshire devolution, so I look forward to having future conversations along those areas. Now, I join pretty well all other noble peers in congratulating the noble Lord Krebs and his committee on a spectacularly weighty report that really does deserve the paper that it's printed on, which is not something that can always be said. But I join the noble Lord Krebs, the noble Lady Baroness Parmenter, Lister, and many others in expressing strong disappointment at the government's response to the report. Thin, I think, is the adjective that has been used. I probably would go further and say derisory. However, I do take one piece of consolation from reading the government response. It seems to have evaded that incredibly powerful directive being delivered to all government output. I don't believe it contains the phrase world leading. And I think that's quite telling, because it's a reflection of the fact that even this government cannot apply the word world leading to the UK's food system, the broken food system that this report so clearly identifies. Now, we are finding ourselves in a very curious constitutional position. What the government's response is, we've all got to wait for Mr Dimbleby's report. I'm not quite sure what constitutional place Mr Dimbleby has in the British Constitution, but it seems to be a very, very important one if we read this report. However, I do hold great hopes for Mr Dimbleby's work, and I very much look forward to them. But I will actually make a small disagreement with the words from Henry Dimbleby quoted in this report, which say, and I quote, "It's almost impossible to act on the food system without creating winners and losers." The word I would question in that sentence is creating, because what we have is a food system that now has some truly spectacular winners. The supermarkets, the multinational food manufacturers, the fast food companies, the seed and agrochemical companies, and some truly spectacular losers, as many other noble lords have outlined, starting with the children of the UK, who are losing out with a dreadful quality of diet. Our public health is losing out very spectacularly, and, of course, our environment. Now, it's often being said that Mr Dimbleby is producing England's first ever food strategy. Well, I would say that this is not the first food strategy, it's the first written down food strategy. A strategy for decades has been to allow multinational companies and supermarkets to decide what we eat, and we can see the results in this report. However, I always want to look forward and be positive, and I want to pick out some words from this report from the National Farmers Union, Philip Hambling, who talks about the traditional three-legged stool of sustainability. It has economic, social and environmental legs. Now, I think it's already clear from what many other noble lords have said that the social leg has not so much been broken off as smashed to smithereens with the level of food poverty in the UK. In fact, I would say this is not food poverty, it is simply poverty. And I think it's been very well covered by other noble lords. And I particularly took the comparison from the noble Lord Krebs of looking back 100 or so years ago to the disastrous situation we're in now. And somehow we've been through a cycle and ended up in a very similar situation right now. And I would draw a further parallel with the fact that back then our food system was starving many millions of people in India, in the empire. And today, the global food system is seeing a situation where there's more than enough food in the world for everyone to be fed, but nearly 1 billion people regularly go to bed hungry. Now, I don't think anyone else has yet referred to this, but I think we need to acknowledge that, with particularly the Minister who's here now speaking for the government, that this is all in the context of COP26 and our position as chairing COP26. And repairing our food system is surely part of our responsibility in that role. Which brings me back to Australian issues. Now, the Noble Lord Whitty, Baroness McIntosh of Pickering and the Noble Earl of Devon have all referred to the issue of this potential Australian free trade deal. And I refer to paragraph 469 of the report, which says food imports must be required to adhere to the same health and environmental welfare standards as in the UK. Now, most other Noble Lords referring to this have rightly, and I would agree with them, expressed concern about the impact of food imports from Australia, particularly meat imports, on British farmers. But I would also question the impact, the environmental impact of producing those food imports, and indeed the animal welfare impact. I wrote a piece a week or so back for the Yorkshire Post, reflecting on the fact that not only are my origins are Australian, but my first degree is agricultural science, and I worked on Australian farms. I told some tales from Australian farms and their animal welfare standards then. I should warn Noble Lords, probably don't read it over breakfast, but I can also tell Noble Lords that I was significantly pulling my punches because there's some things you simply can't write in a national or regional major newspaper. So I would ask the Noble Lord the Minister if the government is indeed considering the environmental and animal welfare impacts, not just in terms of competition, but also in terms of the state of the world. Is it appropriate to take food from a production system that's based on ecocide and genocide of white settler capitalism in Australia that continues to be utterly destructive of a profoundly damaged environment? Now, I do want to ask the Noble Lord the Minister a couple more questions, because sitting in the department that he does, with the situation with the UK being chair of COP, a former secretary in that department, Michael Gove, was very keen on agroecology and agroforestry, and a lot of what this report refers to, although unfortunately it doesn't use the word agroecology, but it does refer to farming systems that would fit the agroecological model. So I'd ask the Noble Lord the Minister, as a new minister, whether he intends to push agroecological approaches, and particularly given the stress in this report on the importance of research and development, whether that's something that he's keen to see far more research and development in the agroecological area. However, I stressed that I wanted to be positive, so I thought I'd take that three-legged stool and construct perhaps a new three-legged stool, and try and construct this in ways that the government might find attractive and be prepared to adopt. So I'm going to reframe this report in my final 2 minutes in terms of 3 Ps that I hope the government would, at least in theory, agree with adopting. Now, the first P is productivity, and I often hear from the benches opposite the desire to improve the productivity of the UK. So I'd ask the Minister if there's been any consideration, and I'd be interested in anyone who can share with me any reports on the impact of our poor diet on the UK's productivity. We hear a lot about the impact on health, and we know that obesity, heart disease, diabetes, all of these health-related diseases are a significant problem for the public health. I would posit that they're also a significant impact on the productivity of this country, and perhaps something the government might like to think about. And secondly, prosperity. The Noble Earl of Devon was speaking about the South West Food Hub and how we're seeing developing really exciting efforts to see local food production, huge numbers of opportunities for small independent businesses, for local trade in food, for spreading prosperity around the country, which very much fits with the government's levelling up agenda, I would suggest. And finally, and I will admit I'm stretching the P's a little here, polarity, because that levelling up agenda talks about dealing with the regional inequalities in the UK. And we have poles of wealth and poles of poverty. And if we have strong food systems in every region of the UK, those small independent businesses, local greengrocers, local markets, local cafes, all supplied with local food, then what you have is an economic circulation. So there's my suggested three-legged school framed in the forms that the government might like. And I would say you could implement lots of this report in that direction. So I very much hope the government will reconsider its response.